6233, December 2020. This is from FortObserver.com. In their report, Homeland, according to a recent Department of Homeland Security bulletin, likely state-sponsored hackers are trying to obtain login credentials for executives and government officials involved in the distribution of COVID vaccines. Observers note, at best, hackers are trying to gather intelligence about American vaccines cold storage process because these vaccines have to be stored and transported at roughly negative 94 degrees Fahrenheit or below 94 degrees Fahrenheit, a technological feat for tens of millions of doses. At worst, foreign hackers are trying to disrupt the distribution of COVID vaccines. One potential way is by gaining access to the networks to control refrigeration temperatures and then altering those temperatures, resulting in spoiled vaccines. Criminal hackers, however, may be trying to gain access to initiate a ransomware attack, encrypting computer networks until the criminals are paid a ransom to unencrypt the computers. The latter option may point to North Korean involvement, as the country's state-sponsored hackers have a long history of hacking for profit as a means of funding Kim's regime, or rather, the Kim regime. It could also be an early first-year test of a Biden administration. In defense, in its annual report, the DoD Inspector General outlined its strategic challenges for fiscal year 2021. The top 5 challenges include maintaining the advantage while balancing great power competition and countering global terrorism, building and sustaining the DoD's technological dominance, strengthening resiliency to non-traditional threats, and assuring space dominance, nuclear deterrence, and ballistic missile defense. The low-intensity conflict in some. Leftists call for more arms at protests. Far left chat room participants called for an increase in armed leftists at protest activities to place the power dynamic in their hands in lieu of the police. One contributor promoted an armed show of force in order to reestablish the dynamic between the people and the government and to show law enforcement that there are more armed and angry Americans than there are police officers. Observers note, the number of armed leftists at protest has been steadily increasing over the year, most notably this summer and fall. This specific chat room conversation fell short of calls for open violence, but an increase in armed leftists would raise the likelihood of violence as they clash with groups such as the Proud Boys. Anti-fascists call for week-long disruptions to avenge Rhino. The Revolutionary Abolitionist Movement, or RAM, renewed calls for a week of disruption in memory of Michael Rhino. Rhino was an anti-fascist who murdered a Trump supporter in Portland in August, and then was killed in Washington state by law enforcement attempting to arrest him. RAM has labeled his death an extrajudicial killing and wrote, "The best way to avenge him is to continue building a formidable revolutionary movement that is capable of permanently destroying white supremacy, misogyny, capitalism, the state, and imperialism." My God, the rhetoric is so old and it never ends. Observers note, several anti-fascist groups have announced actions this weekend in New York City, Sacramento, California, Charleston, South Carolina, and Washington, D.C., and other cities. Violence is likely to erupt with clashes of Trump supporters and Proud Boys at Stop the Steal rallies that continue across the country. Armed leftists discuss strategies for long-term insurgent support. Participants of an armed leftist chat room discuss what strategies they could employ to ensure long-term logistical support for armed conflict. They explored several strategies, including the selling of resources on the black market, targeting European leftists with online propaganda for financial and material support, and standardizing arms on U.S. military calibers or weapons platforms to make an easier task of supplying ammunition and firearm parts. Most notably, several participants fielded proxy war strategies soliciting support from Communist China. Why not? They are ideological allies. Most contributors stress that regardless of the strategy, popular support will be critical to sustaining an insurgency or revolution. Observers note, Long-term logistic support and manpower are significant challenges for insurgencies to overcome. Building popular support, establishing black markets, and raiding government supplies are common tactics. In addition, insurgencies often leverage international support for supplies, training, manpower, funding, and safe haven. Soliciting external support would indicate a significant development in far-left capabilities and intent to establish a revolutionary insurgency in the U.S. For the upcoming event calendar, sunnied with continued sunny. 3 to 10 December, Avenge Michael Rhino by Ram nationwide. 5 December, BLM Antifa Soup Drive by BLM Antifa. They're actually doing something positive instead of burning crap to the ground. Charleston, South Carolina. 5 December again. Defend Sacramento, Antifa. What a joke. Sacramento, California. We're going to defend Sacramento well, I don't think they've tried to burn Sacramento down yet. Give them time. 7 December, No More Pigs, the They Them Collective, another freaking joke. Washington, D.C. 11 to 12 December, Defend D.C., All Out D.C. Yeah, they're all out, as they're all out. In Washington, D.C. Careful in Washington, D.C., because it's getting colder, so you don't want to be all out at the All Out rally. 12 December, March for Trump, Washington, D.C. Lastly, Swamp News. Biden Treasury pick Janet Yellen promised to use her department, the Department of Treasury, to address race, gender, and climate crisis. The quote, racial disparities in pay, job opportunities, housing, food security, and small business lending to deny wealth building to communities of color. Please. Yellen said during the announcement in Wilmington, Delaware, that the COVID-19 pandemic and the ensuing lockdowns made problems worse for less fortunate Americans. Yellen is another member of the permanent, unelected bureaucrat class of Washington, D.C., in other words, the swamp. Really? Why just persons of color, whoever the hell they are? How about every freaking American that is affected by these little dictators that have shut down local economies across the country? Screw you. That's the news. 623 out.